Welcome to the Juco Word Podcast. Today we have Tonyah Dee on the podcast. Tonyah is a coach and teacher where she teaches evidence-based lifestyle tips integrated with spiritual and contemplative practices. Being a life coach, registered dietitian, and master meditation teacher makes Tonyah's perspective deep yet broad. She also creates original devotional chant music to go with her Christ-centered meditation and prayer practices. Tonyah is the founder of YahLight, a movement to ignite the light within, and she's on a mission to serve others like herself who want to pursue and become peacemakers. Tonyah, thanks for being on today.
Thank you, Raul, for inviting me onto your show.
Just to give some context or some background, I know that there is a substantial difference between being on the computer all day, working, and then being on the mobile computer while you're off work, and then not having that time to shut down. And that does create a level of, I don't want to just call it anxiety to call it anxiety, but it does create a level of stress, potential anxiety, potentially always on go, never having peace of mind, not really stopping. And I know that like even me can get into that kind of whirlwind, even if I do have a good practice in the morning to wake up, pray, meditate, try to work out, get that in the morning. But I find that right now as a culture or even as a society, we're in that cycle. And I think this has been commented on multiple different ways, but I do think there's going to be research in our era about how unhealthy that kind of lifestyle is and how unhealthy some social media actually can be to people. But I want to get your take on like your journey because you're addressing this from your own angle, that a core problem that is, I don't think it's a unique culture problem, but a unique human technology intersection problem.
I like how you mentioned the word stress because we're all familiar with what that word feels like and how it ends up unraveling in our lives. And the constant influx of information coming at us is one thing. It's very difficult for our minds to process this much information. And this is what the mind does. This is the purpose of the mind. Mm-hmm. It's to process and analyze, solve problems, and judge. So if we're throwing the mind so much like visual images and information, it's really going to cause the mind to overwork, for one thing, and that can cause an imbalance, a real disruption in the body, soul, spirit, like just in our whole being. This will cause a disruption, not to mention that we all know that there's an electromagnetic field that's in the world, right? It's in nature. It's in our heart. It comes out of our heart. We have an electromagnetic field that comes out of our heart. The field of a computer or a mobile device is different. It's at a different frequency, wavelength, vibration, and it can disrupt our electromagnetic field. We're electric beings. It's so important to shut the devices off, and it's one of the reasons why I recommend early morning meditation, because before the whole a download of all of the different devices stuff, and it's been practiced for thousands and thousands of years by yogis and monks and stuff like that, to get up very early in the morning. And that's when you should have your meditation practice, because that energy is really not there. And then I'm a big advocate for nature, because nature has that electromagnetic energy that's healing, that actually vibrates at the same way we do, because we're part of that creation.
Interesting. And I think I want to go back to what you mentioned around the disruption between mind, what was a mind, soul, spirit, or mind, body. Essentially, there's a connection there. And I think that taking this to a practical approach that I've actually given a talk on, there was he's an engineer, he's a founder, like a technical founder, but he tracked down, I think for the last 2 years, what he was actually doing in terms of workload. And majority, being an engineer, he did maybe 16% of his time in the last 2 years when he did the study, or his own log was around engineering, maybe 30% in selling, but a high majority, it was close to 60. Don't quote me on this, but it was like a higher than 60% of processing information every day. And I think that's also something that I do constantly. You get flooded with information, flooded with pings, and we're constantly processing that and understanding that process. It does feel draining. You can get tired. I'm like, oh, woe is me. I know what it is to work with my hands, and I know how it is family, like going out to and working outside, but this is a different kind of tired. But I do understand that it's like a drain, and then how that can disrupt, like you mentioned, our balance. And let's talk a little bit more about that, the balance, and we could hit on some of the habits. We talk about early morning habits, but let's talk about the balance.
Okay, so just to mention, I'm a registered dietitian, and I used to really talk about feeding, how to feed the body. So,
Mhm.
expert, everybody diets food. I got to the point where I realized you can't just talk about the body. You have to talk about how we can feed our body, how we can feed our soul, and how we can feed our spirit. These are the three aspects of the human being
Mm.
according to the Bible: body, soul, spirit. It makes the most sense to me. Sometimes people talk about mind, body, soul, and they leave out spirit, but we're an eternal spirit too. How this disrupts our overall well being is that we're really feeding our mind, which is in our soul, so, which is important, but we tend to try to, like a computer, store all the information. So we're from the time we're born, you can imagine, right? You can remember, you have memories from when you were younger. You have emotional experiences stored from when you're younger. So our soul stores stuff. Our mind is seeking to store stuff. So it's a way of, we're not only trying to process that information, but trying to figure out how to use it and how to store it, or whether we should store it, or how we can store it. And it's our mind, or our soul wants to experience life, and it wants us to survive. So it's really looking for information too that it thinks can be helpful for its own survival. And so, like, weeding through all of this stuff it's we don't need all that information in order to survive. Let's just say it that way. And it, some aspect, it kills the whole organism, the whole, if
Yeah.
just focused on the one thing
And
too
I want
much.
to, yeah, you're right. And I want to jump on that because we don't, and I want to repeat the sentence and I want to elaborate or unpack that a little bit because you don't just need the information to survive. And here's a practical tip, and this is what I was actually listening to the other day. There's a study from MIT talking about how no matter how great we can get with artificial intelligence and machine learning to understand, we can assess purpose by observation. So there is something on how we observe, and we can quickly and have ingenuity to understand purpose or function. And sometimes it's the way that we perceive or look at something. So I can try to find that study. I know there's one on the reader for MIT talking about how AI is no match. I'll read the headline: AI is no match for the quirks of human intelligence. And I think that's something that I like that you're bringing up, because I find the fallacy that we believe that, oh, in the future we won't have to think much because computers are just going to do everything. And that's not the case. I think computers can compute and understand functions between this or that and make decisions based on maybe some qualitative, definitely quantitative data. But I think for us, there is something else that we do have: intuition and foresight by observation, by not just looking, like you mentioned, focusing just on the body. If we just focus on eating the right plants and the right foods and the right nutrition, that's great, but we can still be deprived in other areas, like deprived of the mind, deprived of our soul. So I want to just unpack that for a second, because I found that statement from MIT to be pretty eye opening.
How I feel like I would interpret that is, you can compare an AI or a computer to our mind.
Mhm.
So that's one part of it. Just our mind is processing, analyzing, judging, calculating, storing information. It's very much like a computer. Again, I said body, soul, and our mind is in our soul. And there's this aspect of us that's spirit. We are all born with the human spirit, and we're really spiritual beings. And you mentioned intuition. Things like intuition or a kind of a deeper knowing, like you said, observation. Ideally, in, say, let's go back to meditation. When we're meditating, we're learning to observe the mind from this deeper place. Biblically, it says the spirit of man is the lamp of the Lord. So it shines on our inner parts. That's what it says in the Bible. This one part of us, and I see this in a lot of just general culture or wisdom teachings, they're all trying to get us to get to that part. And that's the part that no AI is going to be able to replicate. So the AI can do quite a lot with what our mind can do. We're very capable people, but the goal is to really be able to take all that information and, like you said, go deeper and intuitively know what we need to keep, what we need to not keep, what is helpful, what we can use, what we can bring forward from our life. And each one of us, that'll be different. Like your intuition talks to your unique soul, and you're going to create something completely unique. And that's what makes human beings so interesting, is we are all totally unique. But this is because we have these unique parts. And AI might not ever have a real functioning, they'll have a robotic body, but not one that's so interactive with the soul and a spirit. So that would be my take on what they're trying to say. There's just no way.
Yeah, and it's like even the introspection too. Will machines have introspection or be able to get to that level? And I'm not sure if that's something that we can do, at least currently. I do want to move into one thing. You sent me a paragraph, and this is something I highlighted a sentence out of it. I really want to help me unpack this. Is that discipline and focus comes from the deeper aspects of our multi-dimensional nature. You might have gotten me with the word discipline, but I and the word focus, two trigger key words for me. But can you just dive a little bit about that? Because there is discipline within this, there is understanding and knowledge, but I kind of want to understand where you're coming from with this.
Okay. So I know people hate the word discipline, but it really just means to practice something. You're going to have to learn guitar. You're going to have to practice that guitar. So if you want to learn how to focus your energy, focus your intention, focus an ability to be clear and
Yeah.
present, right? It actually does take some work. And it's primarily because our soul is very active. So our mind's very active, our emotions are active, and our desires are really active. And if we just get caught right there, you've seen people in a meeting where they're rolling their eyes or they're raising their hand or they're blurting things out. They don't have the ability to be focused and have self-control. In what I talk about a discipline too, is it could be a spiritual discipline where we're really working from the power of our spirit to control our self, our soul. And so evidence-based, there's a lot of evidence about meditation and how it increases your focus. Right? That's one of the main things. It can increase your focus. It's true because if you're able to sit still and say, okay, I'm going to have the discipline of sitting completely still and observing my thoughts and letting them just, like, our thoughts aren't always real. They're not always true. They're real, but they're not true. So some thoughts are false. They're just stored information like that computer, like fake media. So if you're able to sit in a meeting and you have a thought and you've learned to observe your thought, you're not going to blurt it out. So the other thing we can observe are emotions. So we're focusing, I like focusing on my soul during meditation, which is my mind, my emotions, and my desires, my free will, because this is the part of us that acts out. It's very, the ego, it's really strong, it wants to talk, it wants to feel, It wants to have things. I want that cup of coffee now. And so if you can sit in meditation, like discipline yourself, like I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to observe my thoughts, my mind. I'm going to observe my emotions. You might be angry. You might be sad. You might be like a lot of different emotions. And I'm going to observe my desires, my free will, what I want, what I don't want. Like right now, I want that cup of coffee. Right now, I don't want to be sitting in meditation. You just observe. You're observing from that deeper place. And we're focusing on control, self-control, having patience for ourselves. We're focusing on listening. So imagine the skills that we're developing. Like this is the strategy for business or life. We're developing these skills: patience, self-control, the ability to focus, the ability to listen. We're really just listening to ourselves, which results in we really get to know who we are, which is really awesome. It's a great side thing that happens is, oh, you're going to get to know your own mind. It's different from mine. My mind is a planning mind. Your might be an analytical mind. Somebody else has a worrying mind. You get to know your own mind.
Interesting.
And you get to know your emotional makeup. Like I used to run with a lot of anxiety, and that's why I started meditating in the first place.
I want to bring this back because I know the observation I want to dive into, but even like you mentioned, the key practice of focus, and this is not like an important thing. Like this is everything. Like you know how hard it is to plan a quarter with a team that's bigger than you, and then even for business sake, like here are the goals. Like no, here are the goals. Like what about these goals? What about this goal? It's like just getting the right focus, even in that simple, practical, silly example that's maybe not so silly, living it as one example. It's so true. Having that clear focus of what is important. And I'm not going to go out there just to have the whole team do it, but what if everyone just meditated on what the goal was? That, I mean, what would be the focus? That would be pretty cool. Or even your goals, like say you personally have like your, let's say it's a fitness goal, or you personally want to be able to have a certain sales goal, like meditating on that. That'd be pretty interesting. And I think we want to also depict that this is focusing on meditation of learning oneself. I think that's critical. There's, in my opinion, different types of meditation, right? And then with this one, it's more about understanding self and understanding self-control. And I even had it myself where I didn't meditate as often, and it would be a struggle. I have to be silent and still and being very impatient. And dang, I used to be good at this. Now I was bad. So it's interesting to measure that. But you talk about observing thoughts. And I think the one thing you mentioned was not letting them get to you and having that self-control. Talk to me a little bit more about, because thoughts are powerful. Thoughts incur, even if they are fake beliefs or misinterpretation of data, let's put it that way, they do incur action and they do promote, you know, actions that may be based on false or real data. So talk to me a little bit more about observing thoughts, interpreting that in terms of analyzing if it's true or not true, but then also the weight of words that come through because we think in words.
Exactly. The words you choose today will heavily determine the outcome of your tomorrow. And our words are so important. So the way we have clarity and dignity and wisdom around our words is words come from thought. Our thoughts come from our mind, and our mind comes from our soul. So the way that I've learned to really have a clarity around my words and self-control around what I speak is this ability to, one, get to know your own mind, because that's where it's coming from. And like you said, our mind, we have our own perspective. I have my own perspective based off of how I was raised and my experiences that I had in my childhood, all that stuff that's stored in my mind. Now I have a unique perspective. It doesn't mean that stuff that's stored in my mind is true. I had stuff stored in my mind that was constantly telling me thoughts. You can't trust people. This was all based off of my childhood. And until I could observe those thoughts, it was thoughts lead to emotions and emotions lead to behaviors. And these three things are once again the characteristics of our soul: thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, or our free will, our choices. So we're stuck. We go from our thoughts to our emotions to our behavior and action that's not good. So and that that can create an emotion that's not good, that creates a thought that's not good, and we can just get stuck in the cycle forever. So again, being able to observe the thoughts in our mind, and this is what I'm talking about, the discipline, the practice over time, is because these thoughts will come up like, oh, I'm not worthy, or I'm not good enough, or I can't trust people. And you can actually, from that deeper place of intuition and wisdom or spiritual power, like they call a higher power, right? It's a deeper place, it's a higher power. This higher power will say, that's just not true. And little by little, these thoughts start actually leaving your whole life. They're just gone as soon as you identify them and just say they're not true. They tend to leave. And then these thoughts are gone. And then the words that you use are really becoming more aligned with these wiser thoughts. You see how that works?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is a practice of trying to determine like what things stored in your mind are true and false, what's fake media, what's the real truth, and what's a higher thought. So a lot of times spiritual practice, no matter what it is, no matter if it comes from a religion, all of the religions I can name are all trying to help us renew our mind with higher, better thoughts. I am loved, I am accepted, I am powerful, I can forgive, I can love, I am receiving love, I am love. So you start to have these different thoughts that are from the spiritual as the spirit, this higher power.
Yeah. And I think that there is like a sticking point when people start saying spiritual, but the way that you've described it, we understand where the source of why we say it's a spiritual thought or in something greater. And even I think though even language, right, kind of reflects of how deep people have gone into understanding self and understanding thought. Because sometimes I catch myself. I forgot when it was actually. It might have been maybe 6 months ago, but I'm like, you know what? I'm going to improve my vocabulary because I don't want to sound like I'm expressing myself with more intention. But I also find people who, like yourself, practice deeply and actually know that have a more eloquent way of describing ideas or thoughts, and it's not by accident, clearly. So I think that's also another way to not only process yourself in terms of understanding self, understanding what you're going about, but also how you communicate that with others and being able to work through like inner struggles. And in this case, really around, well, is that true? Is this idea actually the way reality is? And I appreciate you calling out the fact that every idea that we have in our mind isn't always true, because I know there's I don't want to say false teaching, but there's misleading ideas that what you perceive to be true is truth, and that becomes a problem, because if you perceive something to be true and then I perceive that to be false, then who's true? You're me, and that becomes conflicting. I think you've given us like a really good practice of understanding the flow, and then that the emotion is that the link between thought and behavior. As we move into a space of perhaps more self-discipline or even self-control when it comes to emotion and thought, where do you see this going into everyday practice? Let's say I got 5 minutes each morning. Like, how do I practice this for 5 minutes to prep myself or to prime myself to be as a best husband, father, leader, coach, consultant for the day?
The truth is, when I first began to meditate, I could sit for only about 3 minutes. I was just really full of anxiety. And so my mind was bad. My emotions were bad. Like, it was like, I was so uncomfortable. I'm like, oh, I can't sit here. I got to go. I got things to do.
Yeah.
Well, so if you only have 5 minutes,
It's an example. So it's an example, but I appreciate
yeah,
your vulnerability there.
but you can take the same practice from 5 minutes to 10 minutes, or you're sitting at a meeting and you feel really uncomfortable too, or you're not having to talk so you can get into this other space. If you can just sit for 5 minutes in the morning and sit, the goal is to sit with an alert yet relaxed state. You don't want to tense up because that'll release the stress hormones. You want to have a really small, that's why almost every meditation practice has a breath aspect. It's a slow, deep, easy breath, like 5 counts in, 5 counts out. So one of the first things you want to do is connect to this like deep breath, that a relaxed breath releases these hormones that cause a relaxation response in your body. So we always want to stay as relaxed as possible because that's where we get more clarity. So get into this posture. Ideally, your spine is straight. You can be sitting on a chair, couch, whatever. Close your eyes. Now we're going to go inside to explore your inner person this morning, because we're different every single day. So I would go inside and you're going to explore those 3 aspects from the deeper place, say your heart. So the heart is technically biblically where the spirit lives. So the spirit's in our heart. So we're observing from our heart, and we're going to observe these aspects of ourselves. So you're going to go like, how's my mind today? And you'll notice, oh my gosh, my mind is like ding ding. And it's funny because the more you observe your mind, like in a routine way, like daily doing this practice, your mind's not trying to overwork and get your attention so much. It knows you're going to be there again tomorrow. So it tends to calm back, it calms down, but just observing the mind. Like sometimes I wake up in the morning and my mind's very into planning my future. That might mean I'm a little bit anxious, or my mind is worrying about something that might be like, oh, what is it that I'm worried about? So it's not that our mind's not true, because our mind has these true and false thoughts. But if you can determine what's your mind trying to get you to focus on,
Discernment practice at that point. It's, well, what is this? And is it a good inspiration or a bad inspiration?
Is this a true thought or a false thought? And what maybe is the deeper reason that my mind is overactive, or focused on the future, focused on something else, or analyzing this one person, or ruminating a conversation that you had. There's something that needs to be resolved, and your mind's trying to help you to resolve that. So just checking in, who am I today? What is my mind doing? And then how am I feeling? What's real surprising is I'll wake up in the morning and I don't even know that I'm feeling really sad today. And I would have carried that out into my day. Mm-hmm. So in that 5 minutes, you can just say, oh, what am I feeling? And hey, I'm feeling pretty good. I feel pretty neutral. I feel pretty relaxed. Or hey, I feel really constricted. I feel sad. I feel angry. And in that moment, you're able to have some compassion for yourself. That's the idea. Like just say, oh, wow, I see that I'm angry. I see that I'm sad. I see you. I see you. Our soul wants to be seen by us, or it's out there in the world. Hey, look at me. So we spend that time, 5 minutes, our mind, our emotions, and then our desires. What do we really want? And there's a whole range of what we want, from I want a cup of coffee to I really want to serve humanity in this way. So there's this whole range that our will, our free will, our desires, we can learn to talk to this part of ourselves by asking like 4 basic questions. Just try to answer, I want, I don't want, I will, and I won't. And if you can do, this is just my shortened version, but you can say, okay, answer, I want, what do I want? I want to be successful at that meeting today. I don't want to eat donuts at the morning breakfast coffee thing in the morning. So it's funny if you can, and if you take this practice longer and deeper, it seems to me you get to those deeper I wants. This is the way my soul really wants to show up in the world. This is the way my soul, what I'm hearing is my purpose. I want this purpose to serve this in my lifetime. If you only have 5 minutes, you might get just what you want, what you don't want, what you wish for. But if you can start taking your practice to 5 to 10 minutes, you'll see that you just get deeper in everything. But for 5 minutes, explore who you are. And then at the end of it, really try to come to some peaceful conclusion. I love myself. I love others. I'm here to serve. I'm going to have a peaceful day. And really, there is always a place of real peace and stability at the core of us. Find that at the end of the 5 minutes. You might want to say a little prayer or intention for the day. And then you start your day cleansed. It's like taking a shower for your soul, right? So you're taking your shower for your body, you take a shower for your soul. And then when you go out into the world, you know who you are, like, and you've settled these parts of yourself. So they're not going to overreact during the day, or they're not going to get somebody else to try to see, hey, I'm feeling sad, or help me solve this problem, whatever. You see how that works?
Yeah, that's actually really, you glossed over it, but if you don't do this, it is a huge cost of the rest of the day. If you're feeling sad, then you're going to take that and carry it into your day. And I even took a note like, hey, maybe try this while I do my morning shower so I don't forget, ingrain that habit. I really appreciate you walking through pretty much the technique or a tool that we can take into our quiver, into our day. But Tonyah, I think for our listeners out there, what's the best place for people to, one, thank you for this episode, and two, learn a little bit more about what you're up to?
Oh, thanks, Raul. My website is called YahLight, YahLight. My name is Tonyah, TonyahDee. And I have a YouTube channel with a lot of these teachings on it. On my website, I have guided meditations, and I have a work with me section. I do private consultations on Zoom, or not, just over the phone if somebody doesn't like Zoom. So that's the best way to contact me, is probably on my website, yahlight.com, and in the contact me section.
We'll put those links in the show notes. Thank you again for being on.
Yep. Thanks, Raul. That was really fun.
Thank you for being here with us today. It's an honor to be a small part of your journey. If you found today's episode with Tonyah fruitful and insightful, please consider sharing this episode with someone who you believe might be impacted by it. You never know, you might actually be a catalyst for that individual person. If you have any feedback on today's episode, or feedback on the podcast in general, if you like specific topics or questions, or guests that you'd like to have on the show, please email us at podcast@dogoodwork.io. That's podcast@dogoodwork.io. And as always, this is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.